What's up, you guys? It's Simon. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, we are finally going to be doing a little shading tutorial. I've gotten a lot of questions about it on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and what have you. And I did do a little bit of a tutorial over on TikTok a while ago, but because TikTok's videos are at most 1 minute long, I figured it would be nicer to do a more in-depth tutorial. That way I can kind of explain to you guys in more detail sort of what my process is, as well as give you guys a couple of tips and tricks on how I, personally do things. And speaking of that, this is how I personally do things. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt. As with anything in art, styles exist, things differ from person to person. You can do your shading however you like, but because I've gotten so many of you asking how I personally do things, that is what I'm giving you here. So yeah, that being said, the very first thing that I do is I get my sketch layer, obviously, or line art, or whatever you want to use, and I will set it to multiply, and I will also have the color be somewhere between red and purple. And I don't mean like every color in between red and purple, because obviously that's the rainbow. I just mean between red or purple, and that is because red and purple will complement virtually any skin tone that you want to use, whether it's a fantasy color like somebody has green skin, or it's a natural color like somebody has like a mid-tony sort of olive color. But I will recommend, if you're using warmer tones, use a warmer red. If you're using cooler tones, use a cooler red or a sort of reddish purple color, because red can really wash out those cool tones. Like for example, we all know color theory, red and green, that's gonna muddy out almost immediately. So if you're using like a green skin tone, you might want to have a line art color that's somewhere around red or blue, or not red, but like reddish purple or blue or something like that. Just something that's really going to complement that color rather than wash it out. Next, the reason that I set it to multiply is because of, you want to be able to use pretty much whatever color you want when you're planning out your base tones. And if I use a darker color while the layer is on multiply, for example, let me get my studio pen. So the layer is on multiply and I use a darker color, it automatically darkens up my line work. That way everything is cohesive, it fits nicely, I don't have to worry about changing my line art color later, versus if I were to just leave this layer set to normal, if my pen will cooperate. But yeah, if I just leave this to normal, it's gonna blow out, it's gonna be a really weird color, and you're gonna have to change your line art later. You're also gonna have to change your line art based on literally any color that it's touching of the base layer, because in some colors, or in some spots, it might be the perfect color, in other spots it might be way too bright like it is here, and that's just kind of a big mess, and you don't want to have to do that. So having your layer set to multiply will really save you a ton of time when it comes to stuff like that. Where did multiply go? There it is, right at the top. So the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm going to take a sort of like flat brush, like studio pen in the inking section. It comes with Procreate, and the reason that I like to use this is just because it's completely smooth and because it has a bit of a stabilizer on it, so it can make it a little bit easier to fill in my colors. Sometimes if you use a textured brush, Procreate can be a little bit finicky when it comes to the color drop tool, so you definitely want to use something that's really smooth. That being said, I am going to pick a sort of non-natural skin tone just so that you guys can see the exact process for how I choose the colors that I choose, because it's easier to see with more saturated stuff. So I'm going to use this minty blue color that I've selected here, and I'm going to fill in the entire area on its own layer underneath the line art. Okay, and then it doesn't have to be entirely perfect, because obviously you can go in with your eraser later and clean it up if you want to, but we're not going to do that because we're going to save time today. So the first thing that I would recommend if you're working digitally is to start with your midtone, because one advantage of working digitally is that you don't have to worry about building up colors as you would with traditional art. And so what I mean by that is, like, if you were working with, say, Copics, for example, if you start with your midtone, it's a lot harder to then push your highlights because you're gonna have to put a lighter color on top of that. And while that is technically possible, it does lead to like kind of weird splotchiness, if that makes sense. Like it will push the ink out of the way and kind of get you this weird banding effect that you don't necessarily want. So with something like that, or even watercolors, you'd want to start with your lightest color and then build your values that way. But if you're working with, like, for example, acrylic or oil paint or digital art, as we are here, it can be better to start with your midtone and then build your values from there. So I'm starting with my midtone, and then I'm going to create sort of like a swatch to the side because I kind of do my blending a little bit more painterly, so sometimes the base color can get lost in between all of the blending. So I'm going to create this swatch, and then I'm going to move on to shadows. So for my shadows, and forgive me if I say left or right and you can see that I am moving it to the opposite direction of what I'm saying. I don't know my directions very well. I'm not the brightest when it comes to that. So when it comes to picking your colors, you do of course want to think about color theory, but an easy trick that I have learned is just pushing your like pen, if you're using, like, for example, the classic area Procreate, just pushing it somewhere in this area. So we're starting here. I want a darker color. I'm gonna maybe push it over here, or if I want it to be a little more green, I'm gonna push it over here. But when it comes to sort of highlights, I tend to bring highlights more this direction and darker colors more this direction. When I'm using saturated colors, I'll explain how that changes a little bit when I use more natural skin tones later. But if I am highlighting or shading something that's more saturated, I'm going to push it over here, and then I'm going to bring my cursor. I'm kind of going to make like a staircase. I'm going to drag it over and then down. And then I actually want it to be a little bluer because I did scooch it around a lot when I was talking just then. So I'm gonna have it exactly where it was. I'm gonna move it over and then down, and then I want it to be just a little bluer. So I'm gonna move it over a little bit more, or if I want to be really dramatic, I can move it over here. But I'm just gonna keep it there. I'm gonna see what it looks like sitting next to my midtone, and I can see that it does work as a really nice shadow. It's a little bit kind of cooler, a little bit closer to purple, whereas this is closer to like sort of in the middle, so it does create a nice contrast there. And then I'm going to select my highlight, or my midtone, and I'm gonna make my highlight. I'm gonna push it the opposite direction, so whatever color I choose for my shadow, I go the opposite direction for my highlight. And then I'm gonna do the same sort of stair-step motion, but this time I'm going to go up the stairs rather than down. So I'm going to bring it up, I'm going to move it over, I might move it up a little bit more, and then there is my highlight. So once I get all of these selected, in fact I might actually do one more shadow because the more values you have, the better. If you realize that you've like picked like maybe 3 colors, because 3 colors is good to start with, but you're noticing that your shadows are maybe not getting pushed as much as you would want to, just do the exact same thing, but this time select your shadow, push it whatever direction you want, bring it down on the staircase, and there you go, you have another shadow that's a little more dramatic than I'd actually want it to be. So I'm going to push it over, bring it down, and there we go. So there's our nice little staircase of values. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to plot out all of my shading, all my shadows and things like that. And this obviously is going to be dependent on your light source. So definitely look at definitely look at reference pictures if you have something in mind. Obviously lighting changes depending on where it's placed. I think I'm gonna put it somewhere over here because that is what I tend to do most of the time. It can also be helpful to add like a little arrow of like a sunshine, I guess, so that you can kind of remember where you've placed your light source. But one thing that I will say, the place where I tend to put my shadows, like pretty much 99% of the time, is I will put them right underneath the nose, in the corners of the mouth, underneath the bottom lip, right here, sort of along the bridge of the nose and around the eyelids a little bit, the sides of the face right here, kind of like this crescent shape by the outer edges of the eyes, and then sort of along the hairline depending on what sort of hairstyle that I'm going for. and a little bit on the forehead. And before I move on to placing my highlights, I personally like to blend out my shadows because it can be easier to place the highlights on top than if I have them all together at once, because they sort of blend together and do some weird stuff that I don't necessarily like. So what I'm going to start doing for blending, and actually missed one of my favorite parts, so I do it along whatever this part of the nose is called, and then I'll do like a little circle. Y'all know that's like what I do in 100% of my drawings, is I'll do something like that. So the next thing that I'll do is, when it comes to shading, I will actually put this back on its own layer. Don't know why I made a separate one. I will take the smudge tool and I will set it to any airbrush, literally any airbrush, except for these freckles. I don't know why those are there. But as long as it has a soft edge, you don't want to use a hard brush. You don't want to use anything that's going to have a harsh edge, because then you're going to have harsh edges in your shading. And if you're somebody like me and you want it to be blended and painterly, I guess you could say, you definitely want to stick with something that has a soft edge. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to make really circular motions, and I'm going to kind of bring it a little bit closer, and I'm just going to make these little circular motions all along the side of the face and blend those edges out so that they are no longer harsh. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. You're literally just like spinning little circles everywhere so that the edges are nice and soft and smooth. And you can see how it already adds a ton of dimension, whereas your illustration was pretty flat before. And then I'm just gonna keep doing that until I've blended out sort of every little spot of the shading that I put down. So I'm gonna do that speedily so that you guys don't have to sit through that. Okay, so now you can kind of see everything's really smooth, everything's really blended, but we've also lost a lot of that definition. So what we're going to do is we're just going to color pick our mid-tone once again, and maybe add it to places where we feel like it got a little bit too lost, a little bit too blurred out, and where we want to bring some of that definition back in. Usually for me, that's like the corner of the eyes right next to all of the shadows that we did on the nose, obviously the nose bridge as well, and maybe the tip of the nose, places where you'd also normally put highlight but where you don't necessarily want it to be like super bright highlights. Also, for areas like this, like under the nose or the eyelids where you still want it to be dark and you don't want to add any of your highlight back in, that's where you'd add sort of your secondary shadows so you can push that darkness a little bit more. So usually I'll just plop some right here. I'm actually going to make my brush size a little bit smaller so that it's not going all over the place. But yeah, you're going to add that definition back that you lost before. That way, you know, everything stands out a little bit better. So yeah, there's all of these shadows for this area, and then I'm going to go back and blend in everything that I've just added, so that, you know, again, everything is back looking really smooth. Okay, so now we can see all of those places where we kind of lost that definition. We've now sort of got it back. Everything sort of, you know, stands out and looks really nice. Some tips that I did want to mention that I totally forgot. I do not know how they escaped my mind. When I'm actually placing these colors down, for some reason I was still using Studio Pen, but I totally forgot about my most favoritist brush in the world, and that is this Thin Render Solid from Jing Sketch. I got it on Gumroad for, I believe it was like $14.99 or $13.99, something like that, but it comes with a ton of brushes and it is totally worth the price. A lot of them are really, really nice and really well done, and the reason that I like to use this brush is because of, because of this sort of like opacity shift that it has, where it gets really dark, and then as it tapers down, or as you add more or less pressure, it becomes more or less opaque. And that can be really nice when it comes to blending edges, because the edges are obviously softer and you're not starting immediately from a really harsh edge. That also can be really useful for when you're adding final details like little highlights or rim lighting. It's just really gentle and really nice. It makes the blending process a lot smoother. I was struggling. I was wondering why I was struggling, and it is because I was using the wrong brush. That being said, if you don't have the money to spend on brushes, obviously, you can use something that has a, the same sort of effect, like the airbrushes tend to do that, or, just go through the free section on Gumroad and see what kind of brushes you like, what sort of brushes would give that effect. But that is just personally the one that I use. That is my most favorite brush in the entire world. So that being said, time to get into highlights. So I'm going to select my highlight and I'm going to place it on the places where I think things need to be a little more dramatic. So that's going to be, I'm going to make my brush a little bit tinier, but that's going to be, for me, usually like the corner of the eyes I like to be pretty bright, the bridge of the nose, the tip of the nose, and a little bit on the forehead and the chin. And then if I want to do something that's kind of like a makeup look or something like that, then I might swipe some on the cheeks, but I usually leave that flat like that, or I might blend out the edges a little bit, but I don't go too insane there. So I'm just going to add a little bit of the highlight in those areas, and then I'm going to blend that out like I would the shadows in any other area. I am going to push it a little bit more as well, so I might use like a bigger brush on like areas like the forehead where it needs to be pushed throughout more area, but on places like the corner of the eye and stuff, you can continue to use a little tiny brush. So yeah, I'm going to blend that out. And then obviously, same as the shadow, if you feel like there's not enough definition there, if you feel like your highlight is not quite blinding enough for your personal taste, you can add a little bit more, a little bit lighter of a color, as long as you're not using straight up white, unless you're doing what I'm about to teach you guys in a minute, because that's what I do all of the time. But like if you're highlighting like legit under the eyelids, because you want it to be, bright, don't use white, because it's going to really wash your illustration out. But if you are doing something like catch lights or highlights, whatever you want to call them, for like little details, like the tip of the nose, for example, or the complete like tear duct inner corner of the eye, then it's okay to use flat white. I almost always will use the same brush, that Jing sketch brush that I use, and then I'll start with a little dot, make my brush tiny, and then I'll kind of like stipple around it. And I learned this from, I think it was Sarah Tepes actually, because she said it just makes it look a little bit more like skin, a little bit more natural, almost like it's catching the highlights on the pores. And then I will add a little bit to the bridge of the nose. I won't go too crazy there. And then I will add it to the corners of the eyes in that same sort of stipply texture, because it just looks really nice in my opinion. So yeah, that's how it looks with that. I also, I think I got this from Glowish is where I picked this up, but I just do sort of like a white highlight around the rim of the nose. I sometimes will do it with like a lighter color if I'm doing like a darker skin tone, for example. Rather than using straight up white, I might use like a sort of like light gold color rather than complete stark white, because it just kind of like doesn't mesh well, I guess, if that makes sense. It just is too much of a contrast and it doesn't look as nice. So yeah, I definitely would recommend using, a lighter version of whatever dark color you're using rather than going with straight white if it's, something that's a little bit on the darker side. So yeah, that is generally how the shading process goes. So I'm going to translate that now into sort of like a more natural skin tone, and the reason that it's a little bit different is just because of the direction that I tend to go for picking my base colors. So one thing I do also want to mention is picking your base tone for skin colors can be really difficult, so I would highly recommend looking up a palette. So for example, this is like Carl Z Says skin tones. I got this off of Gumroad for free. There's also like plenty of other skin tone palettes on Gumroad. You can also straight up just Google. I know that like back on Tumblr in like 2015, somebody just took like a bunch of skin tones and then like took the like Gaussian blur tool and blended them all together into a bunch of different skin tones, and the idea was just that you could color drop anywhere on that illustration, I guess, on that swatch, and you would have a nice skin tone. But the reason that I say that it's hard is because it's kind of difficult to get something that doesn't look desaturated. So for example, if I was going to do like a tan skin tone, I'd want to stay up in this saturated area because this looks really nice. It looks really lively. But if I were to pick something like from over here, it's really gray, it's really washed out, and you don't want anything like that because it's gonna make your character look maybe not alive, perhaps a bit like a zombie. It is okay to have cooler skin tones, but cool does not equal gray. So if you want something that's a cooler skin tone, so for example, if I was going to do like a dark cool skin tone, I'd push it a little bit more towards like the reddish purple, but not 100% into the purple. It's very, it's a fine line between this when you're working with it on Procreate, because the slightest push and boom, you're in purple dusty rose territory. But you want to stay towards like that sort of like cool red, not necessarily like pinkish purple. And then I can go over here, and obviously this is where all of the darker colors are. You can kind of see where the grays shift. Stay away from the gray, but you can still go down over here and you can see there's a nice dark cool skin tone that isn't gray and isn't washed out, otherwise, or like unlike something like from over here where that's just it's straight, it's gray. So yeah, you definitely don't want anything desaturated like that. Another tip I would also recommend is work darker than you think that you need to. So if you're choosing a mid-tone, for example, again, I'd want to go with maybe something like, that's a little too red, something like this. Even if I was working like towards maybe something kind of like my skin tone, I'd want to start here so that when I add those highlights, when I add those shadows, I can push my values a little bit more. For example, if I'd started over here as my base color, it would be really hard for me to pick a nice highlight that isn't, you know, desaturated or isn't white. So you definitely want to work darker than you think that you need to. Second or third or fourth, I don't know what point I'm on in this actually. I'm just gonna fill it in like I did previously. I'm being a little bit less neat this time because I'm just coloring it in with my brush rather than with, you know, the line art tool. But when I'm picking my shadows, I actually will push in this direction towards the reds rather than this direction, because obviously this is where like the yellows and stuff are, and it's nicer to shadow natural skin tones with like darker reds and purples than it is to shadow with obviously the yellows and greens. But if you're over here, the yellows and greens are in this direction and the purples are in this direction, so it's a little bit different than if you start from like here or here. But you are still going to do the same direction of stair stepping, so you are still going to drag it from here and go down here. So there's our base. Gonna push it a little bit this way, gonna drag it there and down, and then you've got a nice shadow that you can, you know, push and change to all you like. Also, another reason that you want to start out dark is it's a lot easier to change, like make things brighter than it is to make things darker. So for example, let's say, actually, I'm just gonna take this and I'm gonna make this light, like something like that. Obviously that would be a nice like all over skin tone, but when it comes to shadowing, obviously, or highlighting, it's gonna get really, it's gonna get really blown out, really just way too bright, and that's not gonna be something that you're gonna like down the line. So once you've got this sort of figured out, when you decide that it's too bright and you want to make it darker, the only thing you can really do is push the brightness down, and that obviously changes not only the shadow, or not shadow, but the mid-tone, where is my brain? Your mid-tone color, but it also desaturates everything and changes both the temperature and the value of your illustration, so it doesn't look anything like the color that you had in mind, versus if you start darker. Well, okay, that works. If you start darker and then decide like, oh, I wanted actually something that's a little bit brighter, a little more of like a light peach, then you can brighten it, turn down the saturation, maybe mess with the hue a little bit. But when you darken it, you can't really mess with the saturation and the hue as much, because again, it's just gonna be kind of gray and washed out, and it's not gonna look the best. So you do wanna start out darker than you think you need to. So yeah, there is pretty much how I shade things. Obviously, like I said, you can change this to fit whatever it is that you want to do. You can omit some steps, add some steps, whatever it is that you personally want to do, but this is just how I do it myself. And also I do want to mention that this does translate into traditional art as well. Just keep in mind sort of color theory. If you work with any traditional medium, maybe swatch all of your colors that you have, if it's like something like watercolor or like alcohol markers, and then kind of think about how color theory works, how the colors are grouped together. For example, like we've worked with kind of a blue skin tone here, so I have this blue Copic, it's BO2. Let's say I want to shadow this, so I can swatch this for you guys. So it's a nice light blue. I used kind of a darker blue, either teal or purples, in my opinion, look really nice. So let me see, let me grab. So I have all of my Copics swatched over here, so I can see I have BO2 right here, and I can see that a good purple to go with this would maybe be like, maybe BB, maybe B, like B04, or even this B66 here. So let's grab whatever is closer. B66 is closer. So I'm gonna take this bluish purple color, I'm going to lay that down, and I'm going to blend them together. And as you can see, they are a little bit further apart than I would have personally liked, but obviously you can see that the colors do complement well. If you had a color that went in between them a little bit more, that would be really nice. So yeah, just kind of keep color theory in mind, and also like I mentioned before, keep in mind what medium you're working with and how you can layer your colors, and then apply that to the method that I'm telling you. But yeah, your brush strokes, things like that, all of that would still be that circular motion like with the airbrush tool. And you can't really set your layer to multiply, but you know, your colors when you're working on top of your line art will naturally darken no matter what you're using, unless you're using straight up black traditionally. So yeah, there is that. I hope this was helpful in any way. I know it can be kind of rambly and confusing when I do these videos, so if there's anything that you guys are confused about, feel free to leave a question in the comments and I will try my best to explain it. I can also do like maybe like more mini tutorials, I suppose, on TikTok if you guys are having kind of trouble understanding anything that I answer. So if that's something that you want, just leave it down below, let me know, and I will be happy to sort of explain it more. So yeah, there is the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I want to give a big shout out to my patrons Elise Thompson, Duran, Mandy, Schleeps, Puppy Paws, and Created by Twins. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for continuing to support me every single month. If you want to check out the Patreon, now is absolutely the time to do so. There have been so many changes that have been made to the Patreon. The $1 tier even has way more benefits than it did before. You guys used to just get shout outs and a line art, or not a line art, shout outs and a wallpaper, but now y'all are getting digital downloads, you're getting you know, theme access. You guys get to choose this theme for all of the Patreon stuff. obviously still shout outs like they were before, and just a lot of other really cool, awesome stuff. And obviously there is now the Matcha Mail tier. You guys are getting physical rewards like 2 stickers and a print, and obviously you guys get the digital download as well. You guys get the line art, you guys get the wallpapers, you guys get everything. So yeah, I'm just really excited about everything that's going on Patreon. Obviously no pressure to support me on there, but it does really help you know, keep this channel going and help me experiment more with everything that happens. So yeah, I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.